Hello everyone, this is always one of my favourite videos to record during the year, as it's a chance for me to look back on my favourite shots from the year. As always, I like to start this video with something of a caveat, and that is that these are my favourite pictures when I was pulling this slideshow together. No doubt, give me 5 minutes time difference and I'd probably choose a completely different set of 25. I have put them in some sort of order, but I have to say I didn't put a great deal of thought into it. These are just pictures that I thought were interesting to show and to talk about and sort of capture my 2023 pretty well. Throughout the slideshow, you'll see that I've shown the camera settings on that side of the frame. You'll see them coming down the screen, which give you a little bit of feedback of to what I've shot. And I think what's interesting is actually all the different lenses I've made use of to capture these favourite images. So without further preamble, let's get cracking. Right, so hopefully I'm nice and small on the side now, and you can see the pictures nice and big. And we've got 25 pictures to run through, and I was going to whiz my way through those 25. I've shot pictures like this many times before, and I would say that often the pictures that make my 25 are pictures that are slightly different each year. And this is kind of a little bit more of a classic, just a Red Sea sunset split taken at Raskati, something we do on the workshop very much. But I like this one, I think, really because well, this year I had a lot of changes in my photography. I changed camera systems. I changed from SLR to mirrorless. I changed from a Nikon camera to a Sony camera. But also for me, quite a big change was changing liverboard in the Red Sea. And after many years of using the Whirlwind liverboard, we moved to kind of its modern equivalent, which is the Gazala Explorer, which is in this picture here. So yeah, I think this was a favourite picture really because it was the first shot with this new liverboard. Of course, there'll be many more in the future. This picture here was shot with the Sony A1 and used the Nikon fisheye lens on there and a Matty Smith dome port for shooting the split levels. Right, let's keep rolling. This is another fun picture which sort of just had to sort of include just because it's such a beautifully cute little creature. This is the small Shaun the Sheep Costiella slug, and this photo here was taken actually with a Sony A1, but not my Sony A1. I borrowed one for the dive from Cindy in this case. And she had the camera set in APS-C mode, which I didn't realise because with a mirrorless camera, when you change the picture area of the camera, you obviously, it expands the EVF to fill the whole screen. So you don't really realise you're not using it. And because I'd just come to using her camera from using a Nikon SLR, I didn't really realise that it was on APS-C mode at all. But actually that worked rather well for this subject because these slugs are very, very tiny. And actually when you shoot them on full frame, it's actually can be very difficult to fill the frame with them. So it was actually a fortunate accident that the camera was set up this way and allowed me to create this frame filling shot of the slug. These Costiellas, they come in sort of two colour forms. There's one with a lot more pigmentation on them, and then there's this one which has got the very white face, and you can really see the pink sort of cheek spots on the face. And this is the sort of the more desirable one. And then this is a particularly large individual, which made it very easy to photograph. This one taken in Lembe. Now we're moving to Tubataha in the Philippines. And this is the only picture I'm showing from Tubataha. One thing I didn't say at the beginning was that when choosing these pictures, it's now mid-December. And actually, I've not processed many pictures from my last 3 trips of the year, which in many ways were 3 of the best trips, going to Galapagos, going to Papua New Guinea, going to Anilao in the Philippines. And there's only I think 1 picture from each of those trips. So yeah, it's as always, the timing of this video means that earlier trips I've sort of had more chance to go through and work out which are my favourites and process more pictures. Anyway, Tubataha was back in May, so I think this is actually the only picture from Tubataha, and it's a very simple shot of a large male green turtle at sunset, shot as a silhouette. Shot with the Sony A1 with the Nikon 8-15mm lens. But just a really sort of pleasing silhouette shot. I really like that sunburst at the top with the evening light. When the sun is low in the sky, you can get this complete Snell's window without the sun in the middle of the Snell's window, which is really pleasing. And I just remember the fun of holding my breath and having to swim around underneath this turtle trying to get this shot. So it's a favourite because of the effort, I guess, that went into it. Another image from the summer, this time back in the Red Sea, shot with a 90mm and the SMC-1 in this case here. And this is one of the little unicorn gobies that we get in very shallow water in the Red Sea. This species was only described in 2019. But we've been photographing it for longer than that. This picture here, the hole it was living in is surrounded by bubbles. And that's because I took this picture in the late afternoon. And these bubbles are bubbles of oxygen created by the algae growing on the rocks in that shallow water. And I think they add kind of a fun motif to this shot with all the circular bubbles around the circular hole. And then you've got this sort of screaming face of the unicorn goby looking out with two big circular eyes. And I just think it makes the picture. I've shot these guys lots of times. The shots tend to be pretty similar, and I just thought this was rather different, rather fun with all the bubbles around it. This picture was a real sort of revelation picture for me in terms of the mirrorless camera, in that I was shooting these guys with both the SMC-1 and the SMC-2. And I was amazed how well the autofocus would just work through those very high magnification optics. And in fact, even the face recognition focus tracking would work through them. They were very, very easy shots to take. And that was just this year for me has been all about that transition to mirrorless. And this was just one of those, wow, underwater photography is a lot easier than it used to be moments. Okay, this is, I think, my one picture I've put in from Papua New Guinea. And it's just I was drawn to this image because it was a very different style of wide angle picture to what I would normally take. This is shot with the WWL lens on the Sony 28 to 60, giving quite a different perspective than you would get with the fisheye lens. And the aim of this shot was to shoot the red sea whips, the Elisella, in the foreground there, and all the tiny, I can't zoom into them on the slideshow, but all the tiny little juvenile golden damselfish thronging around them. And then obviously what I was trying to work into this picture was the large Anella sea fan in the background and the school of fusiliers to create a really different feeling wide angle shot. So this picture really appealed to me just because it's so different from everything else I shot. Really interesting sort of perspective, a different style of wide angle image. Right, back to the Red Sea now. And this is just a standard fish portrait shot, but particularly fish portraits were the main reason I think I probably switched to mirrorless cameras. I think the autofocus, the ability to track and follow these subjects and pick them out from the background is so superior on the mirrorless cameras. And fish photography is something I really enjoy and was a major motivating factor for me switching to mirrorless this year. So I had to have a sort of a fish portrait in there. And I like this one here, shot with a long exposure and panning. You can see I like the way that the face of this Klunzinger wrasse is nice and sharp, and then it blurs away to the very blurry tail at the back. It's a really nice effect on the lighting and the movement and the panning. Shot on a 20th of a second to get that light to have that effect in the picture. Another shot from the Red Sea and another long exposure. Anyone who's been following sort of my Facebook posts now, I've been having issues with the panning on the mirrorless camera with my mirrorless Sony camera, but I have no problem shooting long exposures and blur shots. It's just one type of technique that I'm having problems with, which I'm trying to get to the bottom of, but I fear it's a camera issue. Anyway, this picture here is taken with a long exposure to create those, for me, very, very interesting textures in the central part of the picture. And what I like about this image is that combination of order and chaos. We've got all the order of the sweepers all beautifully lined up around the picture. And then in the central area of the picture, that order breaks down into the chaos of movement. And I really like that combination of the two in the frame. Again, shot with a slower exposure. Only a 20th I needed here. And I was moving the camera a little bit to generate that movement blur in the blurry part of the picture. Right, now to Anilao. I think this is the only shot from Anilao, which was my final trip in the year at the end of November. shot with the Sony A1, and in this case, the 50mm macro lens that I'd borrowed from Stephen, one of the guys on the workshop. And I'd always resisted buying that lens because I'd heard how rubbish it was. But it's not rubbish in that it's not sharp. It's a very sharp lens. It's just very slow focusing. And I think particularly on a muck diving trip, that slow focus really isn't an issue. So as a secondary macro lens, actually using it on that trip really persuaded me to use it. Anyway, the reason I put this picture in is I find it just so bizarre. This painted frogfish climbed up onto this fire urchin and sat in this position. I'd never seen one sit in a position such as this. And just really interesting behaviour, probably not particularly important behaviour. It's kind of just a bit of a single animal doing a weird thing on one occasion, but just created a chance to shoot a frogfish in the most bizarre environment. And I've got the series of shots of the frogfish climbing up to shoot it. Right, moving from Analau to Lembe now, and this is one of my EMWL shots, shot in this case here with the Nikon D850 and the 105mm lens with the EMWL 160. And this is of a mimic octopus. And I like this picture because it's not an absolute super magnification EMWL shot. It's a picture that speaks a little bit to the variety of shots that you can create with the EMWL. I love these types of images where you show the macro critter nice and big in the frame so people can really see it, but you also place it in its environment. And this big, large female mimic octopus was a great subject for that. In fact, I persuaded our dive guides to go half an hour early on this dive so that I could get this specific shot. I wanted to have the sun out to create this shot. And the site where this octopus lived, the site called Air Prang in Lembe, it goes shady in the afternoon because it's right up against the coast. And the high cliffs above it create shade on the dive site. But if you go straight away after lunch, you get sun for the dive, and the shade sort of creeps across the site at the end of the dive. And so I made sure we went a little bit early for this because I knew I would need to use settings like f18 to get enough depth of field in the picture to have both the foreground and the background sharp. And if it was cloudy, that would have left me with an unworkably slow shutter speed. So just going a little bit earlier allowed me to shoot this with a more manageable shutter speed of a 50th to get that blue light coming in. You can actually see the shade coming on the sort of the left-hand side of the picture there. So this picture is just, we're really happy with it. I like the fact that the octopus isn't performing, it's just moving, but you can see all its arms. It's not being stressed or harassed up into the water column. It's a very naturalistic feeling picture, which is what obviously I want in my wildlife pictures. Okay, moving on to the Cayman Islands now from the summer. And this is a picture taken with the Nikon Z8 mirrorless camera. And unusually for me, the Nauticab WACP2 lens, which I love using. It's just, for me, too big to travel with, so I don't own one. But when I do get the chance to use it, I do love it. And actually, there are two WACP2 pictures in this top sort of 25 images. So, yeah, I'm always pleased with the look and the use of that image. And this picture here is taken in a cave system or in Cayman. I really like the atmosphere and the feeling and the complexity of the composition with the caves. And then obviously made by the focal point of that angelfish swimming through the picture. Just a very restful, peaceful, monochromatic image. No strobe used on this one. And the WACP2 was good for this because of the ultra wide view and the fact that I could shoot at f8 and have plenty of light because of that slightly more open aperture, but still have exemplary image quality from the lens. So yeah, nice one that, and shot with the Z8 when I was using that in the summer. This now is Cayman again, but this time back in January, and this picture here is from my first trip with a mirrorless camera. And in fact, that whole experience was, ended up being revelatory to me in that Ryan Cannon suggested that I have a go with the Sony A7R5 on that trip, just because he thought it was a great camera and he thought it'd be really educational for me to use it. And trying that camera on that one trip, it kind of the first day or two, I was kind of like, yeah, this is fine. And then as I adapted to it, I started to prefer it to my Nikon SLR and use the camera through the rest of the trip and was able to push it and use it for lots and lots of different shots. This is shot with the 8-15mm Canon lens at 15mm. I think that trip really sort of convinced me that the mirrorless camera could just slot seamlessly into my photography, and I left that trip decided that I would switch to mirrorless during this year. I mean, all photographers are going to have to switch to mirrorless at some point, and having had the chance to try a real state-of-the-art camera like the A7R5, I knew from that point on I would really be losing very little and gaining a great deal by switching. So it was an incredibly valuable thing to have the chance to try that camera. And the fact that I was able to try it for more than just a dive, and try it on so many different subjects was fantastically lucky for me. And I'm very grateful to Ryan for that loaner, because of it influenced me so much. This picture here is actually a very hard picture to take. This picture is taken from inside one of the recompression chambers on the Kittiwake wreck, and this picture is taken looking vertically upwards. It doesn't look like that from the perspective of it, but because the wreck is now on its side, the view out of this chamber and up looks straight up to the surface, which is where that blue light comes from. And it makes setting up this shot very difficult, because the moment you breathe as a photographer, your bubbles hit this scene and disturb all the crud in the water, and the chance of the shot's gone. So I was working with Sam here, who was modelling for me in this picture, and the aim of this shot was really for me to get into the chamber, get set up while holding my breath, get Sam into position, shoot the shot, and then get out of there before breathing. So it's always a favourite shot to do this, because it looks like a simple model setup, and I love those two circles in the frame and how it creates a natural setting. But it's actually a really challenging picture to take, not technically especially, but just from a breath holding and organisational point of view. You've both got to know exactly what you're doing when going to do this shot. Otherwise you just end up with a fog of backscatter, and it really is silty in there. So like one breath and it's gone. So it's a lot of fun. It's a challenge to do. Another circular shot, but this time in Lembe, shot with the Nikon D850 and the 105mm lens and an SMC1. The golden and these little yellow pygmy gobies in Lembe are much smaller than the ones in Anilau, and they tend to live in really tiny places. And these two were living in a old toothpaste tube. And I like that because obviously everyone in the world knows how big the end of a toothpaste tube is. So it's a fantastic size reference for this picture. And also the fact you can see that the toothpaste tube has been discarded in the ocean, which has a story, but it's also clearly not a setup shot where I've just introduced that artificial thing into the sea to get a picture. You can see that this toothpaste tube has been discarded for a long time, and that these gobies have moved in and made their home there. So for me, it tells a really nice little story of all their lives. And I like that it's actually more the secondary fish, the upside down fish, that's the kind of nicer pose. And I've tried flipping this picture the other way up, but it actually works, I think, much better with the stronger eye contact coming from the stronger face contact coming from the upside down fish. Right, next up is the Thistlegorm. And I've for many years done shots on the Thistlegorm of the motorbikes there with strobes behind them to create backlighting like this. And normally I probably wouldn't include one of these in my favourite shots of the year, because they all get quite samey after a while. Not that I don't like the shot, for me it's a shot I've done a lot. But this shot here, I decided to back away further from the motorbike than I normally would. I found myself with a little bit of space on the wreck for once. I'd obviously time my dive to either be just before or just after everyone else, and it was nice and quiet, and I was able to back away and create this slightly wider view, which I rather like, of placing the motorbike in all this space. And then when you're shooting these shots, you're always waiting for fish to swim into good positions, and that Abajubji, I can never pronounce them, Ras swam very pleasingly into the top of the frame there to create this image. Shot on really quite high ISO to get these beams of light from the strobes showing up, while still shooting with a closed enough aperture to keep the sharpness through the picture. And then I was having to use a long exposure of half a second to get that blue light to come through as well. They are quite technically quite challenging shots to produce these, because you really are pushing the limits of the camera. Shot as quite a few pictures here are shot with Nauticam's FCP lens. That's not been released yet, but I've had the chance to shoot a prototype of that through most of the year. A super versatile fisheye zoom lens that is going to be a permanent fixture on my camera I think, for many years to come, and great to start using that lens this year. Right, back to Cayman and that very first trip with the Sony A7R5. And this is just a cute little shot of a spiny head blenny looking out from a hole in the coral, which is then encrusted by sponge and zoanthids. I like this shot because normally these blennies live in holes that are about the same size as them. But this particular blenny is living in a much bigger hole. And that creates, I think, a really interesting frame around it. And obviously I love his garden of flowers around his bowl. And this particular blenny had these really cool orange eyes. They're normally a bit more greeny than this. But I think this was quite a young individual. And it had these great orange eyes that just, I think, for me, really set this picture off very nicely. Back to Anilau now. And this is the only blackwater shot I've put in my top 25. I've done a lot of blackwater diving this year, actually, in Lembeh, in Cayman, and in Anilau, and really enjoyed it and shot lots of pictures. But I have to say, personally, I find certainly my own blackwater shots very samey. They're all the same technique. Visually, the pictures, the only thing that changes is the subject. You don't really do anything photographically creative. So while I really like the shots and I enjoy showing them, I don't especially love them, and I think that's probably why only one blackwater shot has made it into my top 20 or so from the year, just because I find them all quite samey. So one is great, but more than that, it's just kind of, well, here's something else, but I just changed the subject. Anyway, this was shot. This is also, I guess, technically interesting. It's the only picture taken with the Supé, the scuba cam, underwater photography equipment. Strobes, which was nice to use, and I was shooting this with a mechanical shutter. I normally do electronic shutter for blackwater, but I had this on mechanical shutter, 1/400th of a second, to give me a really fast recycle time, which didn't seem to make much difference, to be honest, but it was quite fun to go dagger on the different subjects on the dive. I really like this shot with the jack inside the jelly. I think the jelly makes a really nice frame, and I like the way the tentacles are arranged on this jelly, nicely in the picture, but also evenly spread around the frame like spokes of a wheel, creates a pleasing composition. Okay, back to wide angle. These explosion of live shots on coral reefs have always been a favourite of mine, and I've shot Anthias and soft coral endlessly, I would suggest, in the Red Sea. I liked this particular shot because it's got a very symmetrical composition. It's not always the easiest thing to achieve. This was right at the current point of the reef, so the Anthias was spraying out in all directions, and it allowed me to create this very symmetrical pose with the sun just coming down through a crack in the reef, and then pleasing corals and Anthias filling the rest of the frame. Shot with the FCP again. In this case here, and actually with the other one as well, you can use the FCP typically with 28 to 60mm zoom lens, but I was also trying it on this trip with the 28mm prime quite a lot as well. It's a little bit sharper as a starting lens, and I wanted to see how much of a difference that made when used in combination with the compound FCP. Doesn't make a great deal of difference, to be honest, but it's fun to be able to use two different lenses behind the FCP. And in fact, I think with the production version, there'll be another option as well, which I think Nauticam will be talking about in the new year, which will give another function to the FCP, which is really exciting. Anyway, I really like this picture with the explosion of life, and also it felt different from the millions of shots like this I've taken in the past. I think because of the symmetry and the composition, and I really like the layers and depth that the silhouetted reef and the more distant Anthias and that sun give to the composition. Right, back to a shot with the Z8 in Cayman now, and again with the big WACP2 lens. This shot of the Kittiwake wreck I didn't take. For me, actually, I took it because the divers in this shot, my friends Tom and Maxine, were celebrating their anniversary of many years, their wedding anniversary on this day. And I spotted the two of them just swimming side by side up to the wreck. And I thought this would be a nice anniversary present for them to get a shot of them with the bow of the Kittiwake. So unbeknown to them, I hovered above them and took this picture. But I think it's become a favourite really because of that. It's a reminder that, photography isn't just about the pictures, and I think particularly when it comes to your favourite pictures of the year, it's often the message, the feeling, the exertion, the reason why you took the picture, why pictures are favourites, more than the end result. And you know, this selection of favourites are my favourites, not the pictures I think are most likely to win a competition or the ones that are going to be published the most. They're purely the shots that feel most memorable to me. I'm happy that it's a Z8 shot. I really enjoyed shooting the Z8 on this dive because I had the Z8's EVF set to black and white mode as well. So the picture looked just like this through the viewfinder. And that was great for composition. And something I really love about the mirrorless cameras is shooting black and whites, particularly on wreck dives, putting the EVF into black and white and really enjoying the view. On the Sony, you need to have settings effect on to have black and white on the EVF, but on the Nikon, you can just punch it in and just turn the picture mode to black and white, and your EVF goes to black and white, which is really cool. Another wreck shot and another classic. We've been doing versions of this shot seemingly forever now on the Red Sea workshops, and I decided, because I was wanting to create some test shots with the FCP, that I would do one of these classic shots again. So this is another shot with the FCP lens, and again with the 28mm prime, and here set up with remote strobes in two of the trucks here to create this line of windows in the darkness of these Ford Watt 3 trucks in the lower level of the hold on the Thistlegorm. So just a fun shot. Like I said, it's not the most original composition. We've been doing it for many years on the workshops, but I really wanted to get this shot with the FCP as a sort of an FCP promotional image. So it was actually really fun to do. And normally, you know, I encourage photographers to go down with a few of them and set the strobes up for each other. But I really enjoyed just going down on my own and setting this up myself, and it was very easy to do. And I actually did a number of different shots with this setup, which was quite cool. Another classic, I guess, and this is at the Sandbar in Stingray City, shot with the Nikon Z8 and the Nikon 8-15mm lens. An available light shot with the Matty Smith dome. It was very... we'd had a really frustrating visit to the Sandbar. We went with... this was not on the workshop. We just went on a normal tourist trip there. And annoyingly, it was beautiful conditions on the Sandbar, but it was cloudy the whole time we were there. And then just in the last 2 minutes that we were there, all the group was already back on the boat waiting to go. The sun came out, and I just took this one snap. And it was one of those, you know, what if ones. You know, we could have had an hour or more on the Sandbar with this perfect lighting conditions. And in the end, we only had them for literally a minute at the end of the thing. But that's the fun of the Sandbar. It gives and it takes. And you never know what you're going to get when you go there. And if it was always easy, you'd just turn up there and do the shots. And it was a little bit wavy. But I like the light and the feeling in this shot. I like the 3 rays. In the picture, and I like that motion in the surface. I obviously have so many shots of the Stingrays. I think I'm often drawn to things that make a particular shot stand out and look a little bit different. Right, into our last few now. I think this is oops, sorry, I was just trying to move that so I could read the number. I think this is the top 6. Now back to Iceland, and this was my first trip with my own Sony A1. And shot with the Nikon 8-15mm, and this is Byron posing in Silfra, and I was keen to go to Silfra and find a fresh angle to shoot Silfra from, and this is kind of the opposite way around to my well-known classic shot of Silfra, shooting the cathedral but the other way. And I really like the shadow in this picture from the wall, creating this slither of light, and then Byron there posing fantastically for the picture in the background there, creating the feeling of depth in the image. So yeah, I mean, I would say the classic view of Silfra is more of a crowd pleaser, but I was pleased that I was able to find some different angles and some different shots, certainly for me in Silfra this time, rather than just going there and shooting what I'd done before, but just with better image quality. I was blown away by how much better at higher ISO the Sony A1 image quality was than anything I'd shot in Silfra before. I think that's its real strength in terms of the sensor over the old cameras. As a camera, it's way better, but the sensor is not. I don't think is actually superior to a D850 at low ISO, but at high ISO, it definitely is. Into Lembe now and into the top 5. This is a great behaviour shot. This was a male Banggai cardinalfish that had just received these eggs. And in fact, he actually initially had too many eggs, and the eggs were stuck to the outside of his face as well, and all the other cardinal fish were busy trying to eat them off his face, which was a bit crazy. Anyway, dive guide Sandro spotted this guy, and he was fascinated by it, and the two of us spent some time watching it, and I took a number of photos of it. And as the cardinal fish got more used to me, I was able to get better and better poses, and in the end get this sort of absolutely perfect head-on pose with it coming right at the camera with the big eggs really visible. Banggai cardinal fishes, all cardinal fish are mouth brooders like this, but Banggais have particularly large eggs. They create large eggs but have very few of them compared to other cardinal fish. And that's why they don't have a wide distribution, because their young don't hatch into being larvae. They hatch into mini juveniles and live straight away on the reef, so they don't disperse very much. But they have these very big eggs. And so this picture is very good for showing that. Shot with the D850 and just a straight 105, I think. No, it had the Fit Plus 5 on actually for this one, which I use a lot just to give it a little bit extra magnification in lower visibility conditions. Right, to Galapagos now, and a picture of a marine iguana feeding. I really like this image because it's got the marine iguana with a bit of algae sticking out of its mouth. It was busy feeding away on top of this rock. And then I really like that group of iguanas that I was able to get into the background. This iguana was feeding on the top of a ridge, and I was able to get the camera down low below it and shoot up, shot with the FCP again, obviously with the zoom on this time, the 28 to 60, and shooting up towards the iguana and then beginning to get those other iguanas in the background. Really creates, I think, for me, a really pleasing backdrop in this shot. This picture was with the Sony A7R5 and the 90mm, and this was a shot for me that just really sealed to me what mirrorless cameras could do that SLRs would struggle with. And it was just this is a very quick behavior. These two fish were doing this literally for a second or two. It's a blue striped grunt and a white grunt doing their facing off to each other to see who's the dominant one, and whose territory, who got control of the territory. And I saw this happening. I spun around with the camera, and I was just blown away by the fact that the Sony just immediately just grabbed onto these subjects, focused on them, and I was able to get this shot before anything had stopped. And it was, I guess for me, one of those shots that really convinced me that I wanted to be shooting mirrorless for the rest of the year, because I knew when I took this shot I wouldn't have got it on my SLR. And so it was great to be able to get this shot with the mirrorless camera, and gave me confidence that I wanted to be shooting the mirrorless camera for the rest of the year. And we were able to capture lots of, I particularly like capturing natural behaviours and these sort of ephemeral moments. So a camera that was good at doing that obviously appealed to me. Okay, my second favourite shot of the year was one of my most recent. And maybe that's why it's right up there in the favourites. And this is an EMWL shot taken in Anilao in the Philippines. And I love how the perspectives that the EMWL gives. And this is the first time I had the chance to shoot Coleman shrimps with the EMWL. And I just love how the EMWL takes you into their world. Coleman shrimps are very tiny, and this lens just puts you into the fire urchin with them. And it was actually, I think one of the reasons it's a favourite, it was a very difficult picture to take because it was relatively dark on the dive. I needed to shoot with the aperture closed down to have some sort of depth of field. You can see that, although the eyes of the shrimps are sharp, the back of their bodies is already out of focus. But I wanted the environment that they're in, all the spines, to be sharp enough to be part of the picture. So I needed to use an aperture of f/18. And even at an ISO of 640, that left me with an 1/8 of a second exposure to get that blue coming through. And Coleman shrimps are always moving, fire urchins are always moving. And it took a lot of frames to get a really sharp version of this. They were obviously all in focus, but there was always a bit of movement blur on the shots. And so I was really happy to get this shot using these really challenging exposure settings. So it's a real favourite because of that as well. So I think it really feels like a very fresh perspective on this subject. It's technically, really nice and sharp, great detail in the picture. And then it was also technically very challenging to use, So as a result, really, really pleasing. And then my final shot of the year is this one from the Red Sea, which I think was definitely from my favourite dive of the year. It was one of those dives at Ras Mohammed where everything was just perfect. The snappers were in a ball. I spent a long time shooting the snappers. All the soft corals and Amphius were out on the reef. It was incredibly beautiful. And frustratingly, I'd lent the FCP to Nick Moore for this dive, actually, and I was using the WWL, which wasn't as wide as a lens as I'd have liked, for such a perfect dive with just amazing blue water and perfect Amphius and perfect schools. But actually, in many ways, I was really happy about it because it forced me to take slightly different images, because I don't use that perspective as much as I use the fisheye perspective. And I really like this grand scene that I was able to create here. You've got a school of yellow dotted trevallies at the bottom. Behind them there's a small group of big-eyed trevallies, and then you've got the main school of snappers. You've got the reef wall with Amphius and soft corals, and getting all of that into a single frame is actually quite challenging technically, photographically, and pulling this sort of picture together when all these elements are all moving. I mean, these fish weren't hanging around. Makes this a real favourite shot of mine. It really captures the grandeur, the scale, and the action that goes on at this dive site. And for me, yeah, is a real sort of fitting favourite from the year. So I hope you enjoyed that run through. These videos are always quite long. Merry Christmas to all of you, because I'll upload this around Christmas time for people to watch. And I hope that I have just as enjoyable year next year. So thanks for watching, and see you soon.